a lot of the challenges I see, the underlying issues are exactly the same today as they were 20 years ago going through. And we built a bot and it runs in about, I don't know, I think it was about 5 minutes. So it took 12 days of work that was taking her, and it took this thing away, and it was all gone. And 5 minutes later, a bot does it now. And you can be sitting on a beach in Hawaii in your hut. You can get that email come in, say, here's a piece of work. You sit down, you work through it, you contact the client, you deliver it, you go back to the beach.
Hello, and welcome to Tech for Finance, where we help finance teams leverage technology to support their ambitions as businesses and as individuals. I'm your host, Adam Shilton, and in this episode, we're going to be chatting with Daniel Lawrence, CEO at Bots for That. Daniel has over 20 years' experience in his space, holding senior positions in companies such as Yahoo, Oracle, and Coca-Cola, and having previously been plagued by a very heavy and stressful manual workload. Daniel decided to co-found Bots for That in 2017 and is now determined to help free teams from the drudgery of the mundane and manual, which can make us unproductive, ineffective, tired, and uninspired. As CEO of Bots for That, Daniel is dedicated to improving how the workplace of the future can and should operate, using technology to provide the best possible working experience for his clients, their employees, and their shareholders. Thanks for joining me today, Daniel.
Thank you very much, Adam. That's a wonderful introduction. Best one I've ever heard.
Very good. Very good. So so from that intro, obviously we know you've worked in some pretty stressful roles in the past, right? Positions where you probably didn't have a lot of modern technology supporting you. So is it fair to say that you thinking, there must be a better way of doing this, being the trigger to what you're doing now?
Definitely. I only sometimes sit around thinking, God, I wonder how different my professional life would have been 20, 30 years ago if I'd have had the things that I have at my disposal now. But I guess from as early as I can remember, all I actually wanted to be, and you'll sympathize with this, a complete change of career, but all I really wanted to be was a carpenter. I loved working with my hands and making things with wood. I loved the measuring, the cutting. I loved working with joints, but not the kind that Elon Musk likes. But I loved the process of taking basic raw materials and creating something that was either functional, useful, but also beautiful and elegant. And I learned a valuable lesson from my early days when I did carpentry, and that was I've actually applied it to everything I've ever done since in my career, and that's to measure twice and cut once. So it's an unusual start, I guess, but we end up where we end up. But through a series of circumstances, I found myself studying accountancy one evening, and from there my career sort of went through from a humble country life in the southwest to London, then Ireland, and then around the world, as you said, with those companies that you mentioned at the start. But early on in my career, I was, and I guess I still am, to be honest with you, still quite amazed at just how much boring, repetitive, and manual work and hard work that there is out there. I've got a really good example from one of my early days working at Oracle. I was an expenses administrator. I was part of a very small team that had to process and pay all of the sales and employee expenses for the whole of UK and Ireland operation at the time, which was massive. It was hundreds and hundreds of claims every single week. We used to receive an envelope, a physical envelope in the post, stuffed full of receipts, often with a badly filled out or not even filled out at all claim form, because sales thought we'd do that for them. It was very kind of them. And we had until Thursday to sort through, open up envelopes, sort through, make sense of it all, fill out forms. And the system that we used, then we had to, it was an Oracle system. We had to put all those receipts and manually enter them all, as well as all the physical stuff. And by the end of Thursday, when we were absolutely worn out, knackered, we'd have to stop and then begin the payment process, which was on a Friday morning. We'd run the expenses, as we used to call it, which took quite a while, to be honest with you. It was a few button clicks, but then you'd have to wait about 2.5 to 3 hours for it to finish. And once it was finished, we then got on the phone and rang the data center down the end of 329M and said, can you load another tape for us now? Because we're ready to start putting the expenses over. So they would do that. And this sounds terrible, right? And this is not that long ago. This is 1997, 98. They would run these new tapes for us and put them on, and we'd click the button again and we'd load it up and get switched over. And then after several hours, I'd go and ask the FD for his car keys, drive down the 329M to Bracknell, collect the tapes, drive back to the office again, and then we'd phone a courier to come and collect the tape and drive it to London to the bank so that they could make payments to everyone's bank accounts the following week. And that was just, 20 years ago. Fast forward, you take a phone on your receipt with Dext or whatever, and you hit send, and it's there, it's in your accounts, and it's in the bank the next day. So that's some progress in 20 years, to be honest with you. And I often still do, brings me to tears thinking about the work we had to go through back in those days. But it's examples like that motivate me to do what we do today.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, you say it's not that long ago that you think about it, really, is it? And you look at technology today, and it really is a hockey stick. It's interesting to see where things are going to go. But it's also surprising, as you say, we have all of this technology at our disposal. We're now living in the cloud. Obviously, COVID accelerated that for everyone because there was no choice, right? But I know you and I still see a lot of challenges you're often surprised about. So I guess forgetting about the days of it being on a tape, because fingers crossed they are long gone, right? Because obviously this is tech for finance, right? So specifically with finance, for modern finance teams that may be using some sort of, they may be using a cloud system already, fill in the gap. We've got to assume that there is some sort of basic technology in place. What sort of challenges do you tend to see when people come to you to say, look, I'm struggling?
Yeah, you're right. It's as much as has changed, there's as much that hasn't as well. So surprisingly or not, maybe not, but a lot of the challenges I see, the underlying issues, are exactly the same today as they were 20 years ago when I was working in finance. The challenges I see all the time can, I guess, best be summed up by a phrase I heard about 20 years ago when I was working at Oracle, when it was better, faster, cheaper. In reality, we can only generally achieve 2 of those things, not 3 necessarily at the same time, but it doesn't stop us aiming high, I suppose. But I see modern day finance teams battling with a lot of the same challenges I did. They're trying to close the books as quickly, efficiently, and accurately as possible. They're trying to provide the business with some really useful insights, metrics, and numbers, and partner them so that they can make better decisions to drive the business forward. And all that is, to try and get the best outcomes for everybody effectively. So in doing so, they've got to contend with a hell of a lot of internal and external factors that are beyond their control. They've got to attract and recruit and retain the best talent they can, which is proving more and more difficult, as every day and week goes by right now. They're trying to find and use the best technologies and use them in the best way they can, all whilst they've got this, massive, ever-growing list of demands from the business, new data requirements, and they best not complain. So that certainly hasn't changed. Maybe it has changed. I don't know. Mm-hmm. But I learned a very valuable lesson from an FD I used to work for many, many years ago. The company was sharing its strategic goals for the next 12 months, and they brought finance in too to do the same thing. And we were sat around trying to figure out, well, what's finance going to do that's going to help the company achieve these goals overall. And there was some significant ones in there that were beyond even finance capabilities. But one that I always remember was it was to reduce the operating cost to a certain percentage of another number. I forget exactly what it is. But our FD at the time said that's a cost cutting is going to be a major factor. And I never forget his words, but he said finance must lead the way. And I knew at that point we were doomed. For all those things that we were hoping for to come out of this wonderful new world that was going to exist in 12 months' time, all we saw ahead of us was more of the same, less to show for it, less motivation. And I think, the way things feel today, I think a lot of things haven't changed really since then, which is, it's a shame, isn't it?
No, absolutely. And you touched on an interesting point of discussion, which I've had a lot of conversations around recently, which is the concept of month-end closing out as quickly as possible, getting data to who it needs to go to as quickly as possible. And the variance that we're seeing at the moment is actually still quite dramatic. So some companies, it's still taking weeks. Some have managed to get it down to a couple of days, right? Yeah. But we've got to consider that we have technology, but we also have people. And sometimes technology isn't the silver bullet, right?
No.
Because a lot of delays in month end could be waiting on information from another department, for example. It could be waiting for people to submit timesheets before they can, go through the payroll process, for example. So there are variables outside technology, but I guess technology is there to be used, right? So, but no, that's great. So, I mean, moving forwards then. So let's say, and I don't know what a good example is, but say the problem is, we're taking 2 months to close out the month end, or we're stuck with a million spreadsheets. We don't know what to do. We don't know how to tie them all together. If somebody came to you, where would you advise they start? So how would they go about their investigations? Because of course, there is so much tech available now that everybody can do their own research on. You only need Google or your favorite search engine to do that, right? So what would you suggest to point them in the right direction at the early stage of their investigation?
A brilliant question, and it's one that I encounter all the time. It's almost, I think I actually read an article not long ago, I think it was Forrester, but don't quote me. Mm-hmm. And I think they said all buyers now touch an average of 12 pieces of research before they actually contact a solution provider of some sort in order to see, right, how do we fix that? So that's there's almost too much information at our hands. That's part of the challenge. But the interesting thing about this is that most people don't actually know where the real problems are or how bad their work is. It's sort of people become numb to it. We once worked with a lady who was retiring in payroll, and she was spending 12 days creating the invoices for the payroll solution provider, based on all the different pay slips we're going through. And we built a bot, and it runs in about, I think it was about 5 minutes. So it took 12 days of work that was taking her, and it took this thing away, and it was all gone. And 5 minutes later, a bot does it now, and it's continued to this day. So people generally don't realize just how bad their work is, but also they might not actually be as motivated, I guess, to fix it. Sometimes, the better the devil you know, you don't rock the boat kind of approach. It's easier to just kind of get up and go through and do what you normally do and do it the way you've always done it. So sometimes the biggest challenge is actually having a clear sight of what's wrong, but then having a motivation to actually try and find out how we fix it, how we make it better. Now, finance, in fairness to them, are really good, generally speaking, at diagnosing specific problems and symptoms in their world that causes them pain. They're usually acutely aware of it. The problems that we commonly see in finance is that it just simply takes them too long to perform a task. And if they just had enough time to find a solution, they probably would. Macros and stuff aside, there's only so much it can do, but it nearly always involves their ERP system. It nearly always involves reporting, and it normally always involves spreadsheets, unfortunately. And the trigger problem usually revolves around something in the business. There's a big growth, or there's a demand for something different, a switch of direction. And it just exponentially increases that amount of work suddenly. And some poor soul is then dumped with having to consume that extra activity. And it's probably the reason why, there's a challenge now to keep people in finance and accounting, I'd say. But what happens if we assume that someone has identified this piece of work or this pain point in the business? I've always used a simple framework when we engage with whatever part of the business it might be, and it's called the ESSA framework, ESSA, which stands for Eliminate, Simplify, Standardize, and Automate. So we can eliminate the task altogether and stop doing it. Most cases that's not possible. Normally, most finance people would eyes would pop out their head if you suggested that. So if you can't eliminate it altogether, sometimes you can simplify the task so it's not as monstrous, and you can maybe allocate what's left to other people, or you can standardize it and then reduce the variability or the complexity so that it's a more manageable task, and then again allocate what maybe is left to other people. But you can also just automate it, and that's part of the discussion that we take people through, because a lot of people want to try and optimize it, improve it, before they think about the automation. And then what we actually find in reality is that people try and make those optimizations still thinking at it in the current tense. So they still think about how would this improve it for me. But actually, if we're going to automate it, it usually cuts out the need for all of that. And then you optimize it for a robot to do rather than for a person. So approaching it with that different frame of mind is difficult for some people to get their heads around. But once they do, it frees them up so much more, because the that process, that piece of work, and that pain point is suddenly disappeared. And there might be a version 2 where we expand on it and make it even better. But that's the typical approach that we take. Otherwise, people tend to try and over-engineer a solution to a problem that doesn't really need it. And automation's a really great way to just cut through the thinking process and trying to think, what's the best way this could possibly work. You just give it to a bot. Some of the rest of the solutions still naturally present themselves when you do that.
Thanks for that. Yeah, no, it's interesting, isn't it? And I find it fascinating that there's an interesting point you made there about looking at things from a different perspective, because, and everybody finds it, right? I'm sure you're the same. It's remarkably difficult in some situations to actually remove yourself from the equation.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's that level of conceptual thinking that is difficult, right? When you are stuck in the day-to-day and you live in your world, how do you remove yourself from that situation? It's phenomenally difficult, right? How do you step back and say, right, well, what's the bird's eye view of this? If the technology is there, how do we use that? And yeah, your ESSA framework is good. Just to double check, I've got eliminate, standardize. What was the second there?
Simplify
and
automate. Yeah,
no, that's fab. So what I'll do anyway is I'll add it to the show notes. So it'll be adamshilton.com/bots for that. So I'll include a transcript and some of the notes that I've been making as we go along, so people can pick up these nuggets and surf to all their heart's content, I guess. So no, that's great. And it's nice that you've got a framework and that you are providing that guidance. It's tricky to, as we say, take yourself out of the equation and actually think about what the future looks like, as opposed to being stuck in the here and now. I guess that's fine. So obviously, let's address the elephant in the room. Bots for that. There's a big logo on the screen for anybody that's watching this by video. I must admit that I'm familiar of the concept of bots, but I think to a lot of people, in most instances, in terms of their day-to-day interaction, the only time that they might encounter a bot is if they're on a website and either a chat or a support bot pops up to say, oh, hey, I'm Gizmo, or whatever my name is, what's your support query, and I'll try and divert you to this knowledge article or whatever it is. And I'm also pretty sure that a lot of the starting conversations you have, say, like if you're comparing your insurance or whatever, I'm pretty sure, obviously, the starts of those conversations nowadays is generally with a bot before it either lets you know it's handing you over to a person or actually automatically makes that switch without you knowing about it, right? So, but obviously what you do is a lot deeper than that. We're not just talking about, bots interacting with people. We're talking about a whole new level of automation. So when we look at bots for that in your work, can you just give people an overview of what different types of bot there could be and what their general applications are?
Absolutely. So I think one of the most compelling reasons and advantages for our bots is that they work, in some respects, what makes people comfortable is that they work very similarly to people, but at the same time, they work very differently. So let me explain that, because that's probably confusing. So firstly, robots can work in the same way that you and I would with, let's say the Xero accounting system, because they work at the UI, the user interface level. So they can navigate through screens, menus, key taps, shortcuts, the mouse controls, just the same way that we would. So they can see and understand screens, desktops, and images in our world the way that we do, which is brilliant, because not all systems have connectivity capabilities like APIs, which means that we can automate even when you've got less developed, less evolved system technology. But the advantage is that bots can also work in the same way that a computer does through the back end. They can use codes and connections like APIs, for example, and they can do the two simultaneously, switching seamlessly from one to the other and back without blinking an eye, which is something that we certainly can't do, for sure. So bots can be programmed to do a vast number of different things. They can be rule and logic bound. to perform certain calculations and do specific actions, but just at massive, incredibly fast speed. They can also be AI-powered smart bots or cognitive bots, which means they can be probabilistic based on determined outcomes, and they can learn from the experience and the data that they process to change and improve how they work on different data sets the next time around. So they can improve the outcomes that they achieve. So bots can also do things like reading and understanding documents. So you can look at invoices and purchase orders, and you can read and understand, and then you can extract data from those. And whether that be structured or unstructured, it can do both. And it can also engage in conversations with other computers or with other people in order to provide instructions or receive instructions and give insights and answers and give information beyond the obvious. So from a finance perspective, that means that bots can be used in a huge amount of ways. So if you take the typical finance department, for example, let's take accounts payable, you could achieve near straight through fully automated processes from PO to pay, for instance. And even parts of sourcing could be included to automate things like supplier setup and maintenance and updates and things like that. You could, for example, if a new supplier filled out a web form, bots could go onto company's house to verify the company number, the directors, the addresses. There's lots of things that bots can do. And of course, they do it at breakneck speed. So it not only frees up the work, but it actually delivers the outcomes much faster. If you consider something like accounts receivable, from order to cash, much of the processes and the activities there can also be automated too. With bots, can take, say, a closed won opportunity from your CRM system, whether it's like a HubSpot or Zoho or Salesforce. You can handle the contracts using a DocuSign, for example. You can create the invoices, trigger the supply chain, the deliverables, and then it can post, send, chase invoices, apply cash, make sure that there's no exceptions, or true exceptions can be then put out and handled by a person. So a phenomenal amount within that area. And then next you've got, say, your general ledger. You've got, and we actually have built bots that do things like your standard chart of accounts maintenance, so that they're in sync across all your different entities. We can do things like creating and posting journals. We've got some bots that have done exactly that, where they take information from other systems, combine them, bring them into Xero, create a journal, get it all ready for posting or review. So all of those types of things, and you can incorporate rules and logic into a bot's sequence effectively. So if you wanted to have, say, tolerances to flag, certain things, or you wanted to sort of introduce some sort of pattern technology or pattern recognition into things like the numbers or anything like that, really, there's so many things that you can incorporate into an automated flow using bots, and then it's a similar story within tax, treasury, FP&A, planning analysis, payroll. There's few areas that we haven't looked at or deployed bots within finance and accounting, and it's really great because it frees up people from all the stuff that they don't really enjoy, they don't get value from in itself. It's all about the outcome, so they get to the outcomes much faster. It frees people up. It makes them happier people, happier accountants, whatever that is. But it definitely makes a huge difference.
Very good, and it is, and I'm very much oversimplifying this, right? But it's made me remember when I first got a Mac, and it was, and it might not have even been my Mac. I can't remember, but that was when computers were finally becoming cool. And you could get laptops and all that sort of stuff. And of course, first thing you do is you go into the utilities and you think, oh, what cool stuff can I do with this? And I think it was just called Automator or something like that on Mac. And I remember it blowing my mind because you could essentially just hit record. And you could have the computer move your mouse for you and click through those routines. So as I say, I know I'm oversimplifying. What we're not talking about here is having a bot move your mouse to go in and empty your recycle bin or copy and paste a file, even though you could do it in a simple sense, right? What you're saying is if you had a routine whereby you wanted to clear something out or move something, you take the manual intervention out of that, right? But it was because it's years since I've obviously revisited those memories, I guess. So it made me smile when you started talking about. But again, sometimes a little bit scary thinking, right, well, actually, how big can you think? It's like essentially what you're saying there is you could program some sort of automation to do anything, right? But you've got to have the idea of how that's going to work beforehand, right? But that's what you're here for, right? You're providing that strategic guidance on how to fill the gaps, essentially.
Yes, absolutely, and to almost reimagine what does the future of the finance workplace look like. That's the key thing.
Absolutely. So yeah, I mentioned it being a bit scary, and you know what questions coming up because you've had a look at the questions before this session. But of course, we're talking about AI, we're talking about machine learning, we're talking about machines and bots instead of people, right? And going back to what we initially said about people only seeing things from their world, how do we get around the I'm going to be replaced, or pretty soon everybody's going to turn up in a robot and we're not going to need to do anything anymore? I mean, what is your view on that? Do you think we will ever get to a world where we are literally just sitting on a beach somewhere and we're programming the bots and they do the rest? Or just talk around that. How much do you see that fear element, and do you generally say?
Yeah, it's a common, I think probably less so than it used to be, but it is a common knee-jerk response, is that people automatically think job risk and job loss. And what I've found so far with regards to job impacts is two things. Firstly, that I guess bots for the most part are not used to automate end-to-end fully tasks or processes. So they don't replace jobs, not entirely anyway. And I think that for example, if I took any role in finance, and you can pretty much, I would say, automate 25% of most jobs today. But the remaining 75% that's left then gives you, you can reimagine what that is, and then add a new 25%. Most times when you do change a role significantly, if you remove parts of it, there's lots of things that I find. If I ever spoke to anyone in finance, I've never heard anyone say we're 100% happy with everything we do, everything's perfect, and we don't want to do any more. Of course, that's never the truth, right? That's never the fact. So there's always demands that the business have, or that regulatory requirements, and there's so many other things that we never even get time to get to or do properly. So what we find actually is that when what we're doing is freeing up people, because the stuff that most people do that takes time, that's mundane, repetitive, it doesn't really add any value. It certainly doesn't motivate people. It's not exciting. It's not rewarding work. So generally speaking, what we found, and I found is with every client we've ever worked with, is that they're always quite relieved to get rid of that work, because there's a pile of stuff that they don't get to anyway. So that's what we find in practice. And one thing we do see with our customers is that when they do automate certain roles, generally speaking, the CFOs that we've supported, there's probably two impacts. One is that they're automating a task because they're growing, and they, rather than bring in more people and hire more people just to do these manual jobs, if they bring in a bot, they've done is they've avoided hiring more people into jobs which are not that rewarding anyway. So there's an avoidance cost or a saving effectively there. And then I guess in terms of the jobs that are left, that's where people get into the business partnering, the things that actually are interesting, things that are actually drive the business forward and supporting the business. The business partnering aspects of finance and accounting is far more interesting. It's far more rewarding, and it actually supports the business in what they need to be successful. So I think that's generally what I find. I think in reality, although it hasn't happened yet, jobs can and always will be impacted by many things. Automation is just one of them, I would say. So when we got business computers, you just mentioned there your first laptop. When we got computers for the first time, that got rid of loads of paperwork that we were doing. I remember we used to process payroll. We used to have to print off reams of massive sheets and go in a room, and one person would call out the payroll, the other person would tick it off to make sure we'd done it properly. So all of these things, computers, then spreadsheets, what we consider now as our commonplace tool in finance and accounting, but it also, Lotus 1, 2, 3, and then Excel and all these things, when they came out, you could have been forgiven for thinking, well, this is going to replace the pen and the paper and the computer or calculator and all these things. So then cloud comes along, and now bots. So there's always going to be something, I suppose, that displaces activities within the professional environment. And I think, generally speaking, that's a good thing. We're not good bots, I think, as people. We make mistakes, we get fed up, we get tired, we get bored. So there are things that naturally will suit bots far better. There are things that we are brilliant at as people, and they're the things that we should be freed up to do more of, because I would say the balance, there's probably 25-75, it's probably 90-10 in my day. That balance is shifting and shifting. So it should get to the point where actually we're spending 80-90% of our time on the things that really add value, or all of it, really. And that is effectively the future of work, and the future of work for finance is what we should be looking at.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And what keeps coming back to me is this concept of work satisfaction and enjoyment, right? Because you do need to have a reason to drag yourself out of bed in the morning, right? If you love crunching the numbers, if you love doing that strategic thought, if you love doing that business partnering, then you're absolutely right. You want to focus on that. What you don't want to do is be chained to the desk, focusing on stuff that doesn't add value. But in that same breath, I mean, it's quite timely, right? Because we have recently faced, and I believe are still facing, this concept of the Great Resignation, right?
Yeah.
Where employees have no allegiances anymore, especially younger employees, right? They want to know that they're working in a business that's modern, that's got, I don't know, a posh coffee machine, co-working areas, whatever it happens to be. But they also want to make sure that, they've got the tools in place that enable them to have fun at what they're doing. So you present, a new employee that's really enthusiastic about getting started, and then telling them that actually, we have this process that's going to take up 50% of your time using these dated technologies that is just part of the job, I'm afraid. And I think I'm not obviously saying technology is the only reason why somebody would want to move job, but if you are using these systems day to day, you want to make sure that you've got the right tech stack, I guess, in place to support your objectives, right?
You do. And actually, I would draw a parallel here with the legal profession. This is a really good example. So, I might be jumping ahead slightly in terms of the future work for finance, but the legal profession is going through somewhat of a transformation. So the old-fashioned sort of hierarchical partner structure, where you put in 20 years of work, you then make partner, and then you start changing. You start working your way through, and you work your way up, and you become senior sort of stuff. So that model is very much at risk, and I guess this might move its way into the accounting profession as well at some point. But the model they've got now that's becoming more popular, more prevalent, is this distributed model. So you start up with a law firm, and you've got maybe 3 or 4 partners. They own the business, and what you effectively have is then 1,000 lawyers that are all on contract. So you have everything from employee lawyers through to commercial, trademarks. You've got all this 1,000, maybe 2,000 deep pocket that you can dip into, depending on what request you get in from your clients when. And it's transforming, the legal industry. It's challenging the status quo. It's going to break down these traditional models, where if you're a lawyer now, you can be sitting on a beach in Hawaii in your hut. You can get that email come in, say, here's a piece of work. You sit down, you work through it, you contact the client, you deliver it, you go back to the beach. And what we're doing with legal is building bots that do things. So we've got bots that do contract drafting. For example, we've got bots that do source of funds checks to onboard or to check backgrounds on clients, things like that. And it's enabling these changes, these fundamental shifts in business model that are happening. And I think finance and accounting could well see more of that type of thing in future, where maybe we've got, say, 1,000 finance professionals at our disposal, from transactional up to FP&A tax specialists. But you only outsource the work as and when you need it, based on what you have in front of you.
Very good. Now, I don't want to put you on the spot, and I suppose this question's made up of 2 parts. But the first question is around, for people like me that are just genuinely curious and want to hear about the cool stuff. The first part of the question is, what is the coolest bot you have? And when you talk to people about it, they think that's awesome. but then the second part of that question is obviously, Rome wasn't built in a day, right? You can't go from zero to having everything automated, right? So in your view, what would be sort of like an entry-level starter that's a very basic entry point that people might start applying some thought to?
That's a great question. So actually, I'll answer the second part first, because the way that we approach what we do is one task at a time. So that's the thing. So we want to make work better for everyone, people, profit, planet, but we want to do it one task at a time. So we don't want to boil the ocean. We just start small and you scale from there, basically. And a great one for finance and accounting is, which is also one of our best bots, I would say as well. It's called the Accelerator. So you might guess what it does from the title and what it's called. But we built this bot that obviously, everyone works with spreadsheets in finance and accounting. Everyone does some things slightly differently in a different way at a different time. Everyone's skill level varies from incredibly basic up to very advanced. So what we built with the Accelerator is it's what we call a short code bot. And what it does, it's a bot that's built and pre-configured. And what we give the users or people who are the operators the access to do is it's an entry point, and they define the variables of the Excel process that they want to do. So very easily they copy and paste things like the network address, the file folder address and location. And there's a number of variables they select, whether they want to formatting, text, numbers, currencies. There's a number of things that they can define. So we've got a few levels of it, but they effectively define the sources and the outputs and the outcomes. And they do this without having to have knowledge of bots and without having to have knowledge of Excel. So it's a very user-friendly approach. And once they hit the button to go, the bot goes off and does all the complex things in the background and delivers the outcome pretty much immediately. And we've been able to deploy that not just in finance and accounts, but also to people who in other areas of the business too, like HR or procurement, people who necessarily aren't as skilled with Excel. What you get is the outcome of having loads of experienced Excel people without having them. And that's the beauty of it. And I think that's probably one of our most popular finance accounting bots, but also probably it extends into other area of the business as well, I'd say.
Very good. Very good. Thanks for that. So I'm conscious of time. And some of the questions I've had, we've actually been answering, as we've gone anyway. You touched on the legal profession, and obviously we did touch it a little bit on the concern that bots may be replacing people. But going to the question, what the future looks like in this space. Obviously, we've said that we want to have people prioritizing productive work and work that excites them. Are we saying is that what you think the future is? Do you think that the perfect future is people knowing 100% that whatever they get stuck into is adding value? Or do you think it's more than that?
So as a CEO, I'm really focused on three things. One is the vision for the company. The second one is the people that are going to deliver it. And the third one are the numbers that come out the back. So whenever I sit down with my team and go through what's the priority, I do challenge. And one of the things I challenge them on is, if you could only do one thing for the rest of the year, what's the one thing? Of course, everyone looks baffled, but I can't just do one thing, right? No one. And it's the same sort of question, the same sort of response you generally get from accountants. I can never just do one thing because I've got a million things to do. But if you challenge them on that one thing, you imagine all the things that you'd have to give up. So I'm just going to do excellent insights and metrics analysis. I'm going to give those key insights to the business to get better decision making so that we can make our 10x revenue targets that we've got. If you could only do one thing, you'd have to let go of everything else. But what bots effectively can allow you to do is to change everything, but change nothing at the same time. So you can still do all those things, but you don't have to do them. And I think that's the most compelling thing which bots can offer. The technologies themselves will always evolve. They'll always get smarter. They'll always be combined with things like AI and other things that we can do to expand the capabilities of them. And I think that's only a good thing. If I think about my background, if I thinking back to where I was, if I view my view of the future smart finance office of the future, and think about the technologies that I would need, I would envision a very different world for finance than it is. Because if you think about the pace that our home and our personal individual technologies have taken over the past decade, it's still fairly shocking when you look at what we have to deal with in a professional sense. When you look at work, we go home, we've got Alexa, we ask Alexa or Siri to look at the weather, play music, order something from online. There's all these things that we can do, and yet in the workplace, we're lagging significantly behind. So I had this conversation with a CFO client of ours not that long ago. Actually, I said we were again thinking about what does the future look like? How can we roadmap how we'll change in terms of what we do if we incorporate an automation first mindset? So if you just say, well, wait, 2022 now, so let's go forward 10 years, right? If you say by the year 2032, just 10 short years, and they will go by faster than you think. The norm could be for companies to have access to, say, smaller offices in more locations, more different locations, to support that fully flexible hybrid workforce, flexible working days, job rotation, more fluid roles, sharing and rotation roles, so that people are happy, motivated, they love what they do, they've got more balanced work life. A bit more like that legal distributed model I was talking about. People moving away from that traditional employment model. Then suddenly you've got people that are enabled that need to be enabled, I should say, by greater levels of automation, so that can actually happen, because you've got all that stuff that needs to be done, all the machinery that needs to churn to create these numbers and produce work. That all goes over to the bots, which leaves a really much more human-centric, more value-adding activities for people to do. So financial transactions will flow seamlessly, automatically. The robot workforce might make up 70, 80% or more of that part of the workforce that today is mostly human-based. The books will be getting closed in real time. Constant close readiness, effectively. You've got a better balance between, say, backward and forward-looking focus and performance as well. So you've got your leading and your lagging KPIs, and you're looking more forward than we are backward, because we have a tendency to do that in finance and accounting. So you've got a much more forward-looking focus, which then helps steer the business. And I think the modern finance organization it's much more forward-thinking. It's much more ingrained into the business now than it ever was. I think business partnering was a new concept back in my days. And we were still figuring out what that actually meant. But I think now it's one of those things where it becomes ingrained, and it's almost just, for the finance business partners, maybe the roles and the totals, the job titles completely change, because I think they're just going to become part of the management team, and they're then providing different sets of data, different insights, but they're then helping to drive the business. So that could be completely changed. And days of spreadsheets and pouring through those things, and late nights reconciling data, could all be a thing of the past. Hopefully, I would like to think.
Yeah, fingers crossed, Dave. No, we will get there, and I totally appreciate your point about level of office automation being less than you might find in your personal life, right? Because there is an app for that, right? And I'll come back to a little bit later. A slight tangent. You mentioned the one thing. Is that based off the book? Have you read the book?
Which one's that?
The One Thing. I can't remember the author. I'm literally reading it at the moment. It's called The One Thing.
No, I haven't actually.
Yeah, that's it. So essentially, you've summed it up anyway.
Okay. I'll read that next.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, you don't need to, because you know it already. But no. So the question you asked your team about, what's the one thing that you can do to make a difference, or whatever. That's the concept of the book. It's what is the one thing that I can do that, in doing it, makes everything else easier or eliminates it altogether. And that goes back to what you're saying about your ESSA, right? Eliminate, simplify, automate. So what is that? But it also ties in with another book that I've been reading, again, still at a tangent, Good to Great by Jim Collins, which is
Yeah, I've read that one. Good book.
Yeah, it's from a while ago now, right? But the concepts apply, and
they do.
I love it. There's a chapter in the book, you may remember it, called the hedgehog concept. You know, and again, I'm going off tangent here, but the theory is, you know, a hedgehog is trying to get from A to B, right? You know, that's all that it does, right? You know, I need to nest, I need to eat, you know, and in order to do that, I need to leave my nest or their hole or whatever it's referred to in hedgehog world, right? To go out, right? Then you've got the fox who's trying to get the hedgehog, that's darting about, changing its strategy. You know, I'm going to get the hedgehog this time, you know, but whereas, you know, it finds the hedgehog and then all the hedgehog does is rolls up in a ball, right? Yeah. So it's the hedgehog concept because it is that concept that is simple, effective, and achievable over time. So it is essentially, don't be a fox, don't change your strategy every 30 seconds, you know, be more like a hedgehog and be consistent in what you do. But that's made up of 3 pillars, which is we need to focus on what we can be best in the world at. Yeah, it needs to be something that we are passionate about. And then we also need to be 100% certain on what our key, basically financial profitability metric is, right? Yeah. And all of those 3 pillars together make that hedgehog concept, which, you know, when you look at the good to great companies, that's what they're focused on. You know, they literally stripped away everything else. What can we be the best in the world at? And they went from there. So no, we're converted to a book discussion.
That's a good thing. That's a good thing, right?
Have you got any others recently?
Oh yeah, I mean, I guess I'm always reading. I'm always reading. I'm trying to think what the last one was. The 3 rules. That's the last one I read on paper. Which is, I think the 3 rules is it's better before cheaper, revenue before cost, and third rule is there's no other rules. Rules to live by your business. But the other thing, you mentioned strategy there, which is brilliant because I love this. There's so many things. If you go online, if you search or you look for books, there's so much out there about strategy. But the one thing I believe strongly in, and this has always been again throughout my career, is that the best strategy is the one that you execute. Regardless, you know, you can think all day long, you can bring the consultants in, you can strategize and theorize. The best strategy is the one you execute. End of story. If you can execute, and that's what finance has always been about. It's always been about execution with finance. You know, they are a very much a tactical operation. They're the doers of the world. So for me, you know, finance and accounting is execution. So if we can find ways that we can execute better, more effectively, cheaper, faster, then we're not only going to transform our world, but we're going to transform the world and the business that we live in too and support. And you know, the great thing is all of this technology we need to make that a reality already exists. It's already been invented. We've just got to combine it. We've got to bring it together. We've got to be open-minded. You know, we've got to embrace it, and we can literally change the future of work for ourselves and I guess our internal customers in the business that we work with.
Fabulous. And it reminds me, just talking about the getting on and the doing there. So it was a couple of things. First was because I've had a habit, as I'm sure you have as well, of being a perfectionist, you know, over-analyzing and, you know, going through things to the nth degree, to the point where you spend more time thinking than you do doing, right? So I can't remember, it's like the 80% or the 83% rule or so. I can't remember what the stat was, but basically if it's 80% good enough, then just get on with it, right? You know, don't focus too much. And it's contrary to what some people believe, but I found that quite useful because sometimes actually it's more than good enough at your 80%. It's just you being hypercritical that's getting in the way. Yeah. And the other piece, and I can't remember, and I'll look it up and I'll put it in the show notes as well, but it comes back to putting it into practice. Something like knowledge is knowing something and wisdom is applying that knowledge. I think it's something to that effect. Okay. I can't remember the exact quote, but I will dig it out from somewhere. That's just pulled out from the back of my mind. It's fair. That
sounds familiar. Actually, I don't know if that's Atomic Habits. That's another great book actually to read if you haven't. And for the listeners, Atomic Habits is brilliant. It's all about, you know, beliefs becoming thoughts and thoughts become words and so on. So it's a fantastic book if you get a chance to read that.
Very good. Right, I'm noting all of these down. It's great. So one last question before you tell people where to find you. So this obviously we're talking about tech and finance teams, but myself, I'm a bit of a nerd when it comes to, as I said earlier, is there an app for that? You know, what's a cool desktop application that's going to, you know, allow me to be more productive? And I appreciate too much is too much, right? You can only have too many productivity apps, you know. So I am also in favor of simplicity. You know, limit your tech stack to the point where you're just focusing on the best tools, right? But taking your phone or your desktop or whatever, can you give us a couple of example apps that you use that are part of what you do every day? It can literally be anything. It doesn't even have to relate to our conversations today.
That's an easy one for me, actually. The one app I couldn't live without would be Audible.
Audible?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. If I had no other apps on my phone, I would have Audible, without a shadow of a doubt. There's only so much you can read, right? But Audible makes it a lot easier. You can consume books and knowledge a lot faster that way, and you lose yourself too. But I've luckily now, I mean, after 47 years, for the first time, I actually get to walk to work since I moved house. So I'm about a 35-minute walk to work. So I've got an hour and 10 minutes of walking a day, and that hour and 10 minutes I spend on Audibles too. So I'm not only exercising the body, I'm exercising the brain. So hands down, that is the most important app I possess.
So that would be your one thing, right?
Yeah.
Very good. How would you find the because there is Audible Unlimited, isn't there, where you can consume as much as you like from a select set of titles? Do you find you listen to those, or do you just tend to find do you use credits or what?
I do both. Yeah, okay. I do both. So I've got I don't even know, I honestly couldn't tell you what membership is. We've got sort of Prime membership type of thing, and then there's different membership levels, or you can buy like a one-off for as many titles or in a year or that sort of stuff. So I listen to both. There's ones that are included on your membership, and there's ones that you would need credits for, and you get your monthly allowance of credits, which you can increase. But I find I do both. And I think one of my favorite non-business, non-professional reads at the moment is Billy Connolly, which is Windswept and Interesting. If you like a bit of Billy Connolly, he's an incredible man. Very funny and incredible person to listen
to. Yeah, I used to watch on repeat the tour he did of Scotland.
Yeah.
That was very good stuff. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, no, it's been an absolute pleasure, Daniel. So really appreciate your time. But
pleasure.
If you want to go ahead and tell people where they can find more about you and bots for that, we can finish there.
Yeah, absolutely. So best place is probably LinkedIn page for the company, which is linkedin.com. I think it's /in/Daniel. Bots for that is my private one. And then it's linkedin.com/company/bots for that, for the main company page. And then the website is botsforthat.com.
Okay, cool. So yeah, I'll include links in the show notes for that as well. So as I say, it's been a really interesting conversation, and I'm sure anybody who listens to this will see a different perspective. That's for sure. So no, we'll leave it there. And once again, Daniel, thanks for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you, Adam. Appreciate it.